I was born and I grew up in Wolverhampton, which is in the West Midlands in England. I went to state schools, I went to a girls' grammar school, and my A-levels were in languages and history. And then I went to Oxford to study French and Russian, so that was a 4-year degree. And after that I became a TEFL teacher. So I was teaching English abroad, and I taught in Egypt, Indonesia and Spain. And I did that for 10 years, and most of that 10 years was spent in Indonesia. And then I came back to this country and worked at a university for a while, not as a TEFL teacher but as an administrator. And then I decided to go back into a more pure communication environment because that was what I enjoyed. And I retrained as a speech and language therapist. That was a 3-year course, and I graduated a year and a half ago. I wanted to become a speech and language therapist for lots of reasons. One is I knew from my TEFL career that I enjoyed working with language, I enjoyed working with communication in general, and I enjoyed having a job which involved face-to-face contact with people, so I was not comfortable with a desk-based administrative type job, which I'd got into. I wanted to go back to dealing with people face-to-face and working within language in some way. And I was inspired to become a speech and language therapist by meeting 2 students actually in my job, both of whom had a severe stammer, and were very, in my opinion at the time, were very bravely forging on with their lives and not letting their stammer stand in their way. And that made me think of speech and language therapy, and when I looked into the profession, it really did fit everything. I felt it was the perfect match for me. So the only question was whether I could afford to go back to being a full-time student for 3 years, but I had no hesitation about the job, about the training, about the profession, and I felt at the time, and I still feel, that it could be my career for the rest of my working life. Well, I suppose my first job as a TEFL teacher was very heavily influenced by that, because it was all of the demand for English language is pretty much driven by English being a lingua franca and being the world language, language of business and so on. So as a TEFL teacher, you are in a very fortunate position of being in a lot of demand all around the world. In the profession that I'm in now, even though I haven't practiced yet, certainly through my training, yes, immigration certainly does play a part, because some speech and language therapists, depending on where they work in the UK, may have to deal with different communities. They may have to deal with bilingual communities, bilingual people of all ages and at all stages of learning their second language, and also very newly arrived populations. So those speech and language therapists face those particular challenges. Not all therapists do, but some have to face the challenges that brings. There are 2 ways in which our professional standards are monitored and regulated. The first is all speech and language therapists in the UK have to be registered with the Health Professions Council, as do all professionals working within any medical or health related field. So we have to be considered fit to practice by the Health Professions Council. That's a registration process. And then in terms of the specifics of speech and language therapy, our professional body, it's almost like a union, I guess, is called the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and that is responsible for maintaining standards and for setting minimum standards, for training and further training, and for looking after the interests of the profession and the clients that we serve. So I suppose the main one is the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, which brings us together as a profession really, and helps us to set and work by the standards that it decides on. Well, one very basic issue that we face in my profession, which is faced in many professions, especially in health, is just about provision, and where you live, for example, will determine the kind of care that you get. So that is something that's very much a problem at the moment. We all have heard about postcode lotteries. That applies in speech and language therapy, although people don't like to talk about it. It is true when you do any kind of survey that the not so much the standards, but the quantity of care, the ease of access to the services, for example, is very variable. And then, of course, we were talking earlier about, for example, bilingual populations. Are their needs being met? Are there enough bilingual speech and language therapists available to meet the needs of those groups? And anybody who has a speech and language issue, which is very rare, for example, and requires very specialist help. Again, it very much depends on whether those professionals are available nearby. So those are the things I can think of.